So the title is just just forbearance. The
Yeah. Forbearance, strategic non-response.
Response to competitive attacks. Okay, got it. Okay. Okay, usually you see more than one word before the semicolon. Okay. That's why I asked.
Yeah. Okay. We thought it will be more memorable if it is just one word.
Succinct. So your inspirations for this paper were philosophy, basketball, war, and poetry.
Yeah, thank you for summarizing.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of the Academy of Management Review Origins series. I'm your host, Rich McAdock. I am an associate editor for AMR and also a professor of management at Purdue University's Krannert School of Management. Today, my guest is Goce Andrevski, who is on the faculty at Queen's University, and he will be talking about a paper that he co-authored with Danny Miller called Forbearance, Strategic Non-Response to Competitive Attacks. So welcome and thank you for joining me on today's episode of the Origin series.
Great to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. It is a really a great pleasure to be part of the series and also an honor to do the interview with you, specifically, Rich.
Well, thanks. So give us your brief, 1 or 2 minute elevator pitch explanation of what this manuscript is about.
Yes, of course. What we studied is what are the benefits of not responding or not reacting to a competitive attack. And oftentimes when you think about not reacting to a competitive attack, which is a threat to your company, it can hurt performance, it can hurt your competitive positioning. It leads to kind of negative outcomes, like it can hurt you. So that's your first thought. But there are situations where a company can choose not to respond and can be beneficial for the company. So we introduced a new concept called strategic forbearance, or a purposeful decision to not counterattack when a company is aware of the attack and capable of counterattacking, but chooses for strategic reasons not to do it. So in this paper, we tried to develop some theoretical framework that can explain why, under what conditions or what are the reasons why a company might choose not to respond to competitive attacks. We use this notion of transcendence, which is the ability of managers to focus their attention and their awareness beyond the immediate stimuli, because the immediate stimuli is always, urge you to kind of retaliate, but to look beyond the immediate situation, beyond your direct rival, sometimes beyond the attack,
right,
and also beyond the tactical moves, to look at more strategically into kind of system level thinking on to incorporate that competitive attack within the overall strategy. So that theoretical framework, using that transcendence idea to kind of look beyond the immediate stimuli, reveals 5 key factors that drives competitive forbearance. So that's an initial kind of description of the high level description of our study.
Well, thanks for that summary. Let's dig just a little bit deeper into the details. In the paper, you have this very nice table. I think you've numbered it as table 3, which summarizes those 5 propositions that you develop in the paper.
Yeah.
Can I just ask you to maybe briefly talk through each of these 5 contributions in this table?
Yes, of course. So this table has two dimensions. One is the mode of transcendence, which I just described. It is kind of the ability of managers to see beyond the immediate stimuli, to look for longer time horizons instead of the immediate present situation, to not focus only on focal rival, but to consider multiple other parties, and from tactical to systemic or strategic considerations. And each of those three modes of transcendence are kind of juxtaposed to these forbearance drivers. There are 5 of them: to mitigate rivalry, to reap relational benefits, to preserve existing norms of stakeholders, their expectations, optionality, and strategic alignment. So I will briefly discuss some of these. For example, one reason for a manager to choose not to counterattack is to avoid escalation. And you can avoid escalation if you consider past relationships with that rival and also future competitive interactions. So sometimes not responding is kind of a signal for a more tolerant relationship, and that can be developed over time. So if you have many interactions, you generate greater familiarity with that rival, you better understand their intents, and that can be a reason for forbearance. And forbearance can help in this case to not escalate rivalry. Another one can be of benefit of a company to not retaliate, because that can draw other rivals into the fray. They may have an ally that is stronger, and you don't want to get into fight with that rival, even though you have capability to counter your direct competitor or direct attacker. Other times, you don't want to engage in or escalate rivalry with a company that you also have collaborative relationship. Because companies sometimes compete and collaborate at the same time. So if you have a history, when you have many alliances and you in one market, you have strategic alliance that can provide benefits in many future periods, like long after this encounter in another market, you may choose not to counterattack and not to exacerbate that relationship that you have developed over time. And also when you collaborate with rivals, then you kind of develop better understanding of their motives and intentions. So not always sometimes you react because you kind of have an urgency to counter, and also wrongly assume that you know their real intent. But with alliance partners, you know really their intent. You develop some trust also. So in that case, that's a reason for not kind of escalating rivalry. Other times, it is possible that you have a common alliance partner. And that common alliance partner might provide opportunities for you to collaborate in the future, which can also be more beneficial and can exceed the costs of not responding currently to a competitive attack by that rival. Other times, you're better off to not counterattack when that counteraction can violate the norms of some stakeholders important for your company in future kind of competitive situations.
Right.
For example, sometimes you may be a strong company and you're attacked by a smaller company, and you can be considered as a company that actually is predator, that will create kind of negative impression by your customers. Other times, the action that you're attacked with might be inconsistent with the expectations of your customers. We give an example, for example, in the paper, when McDonald's didn't respond to the new product by Burger King with 30% lower calorie fries. And of course, McDonald's didn't respond to that because they didn't want to reduce the quality of their iconic fries. So those expectations play a big role, and we provide a lot of other situations where stakeholders can have a strong effect on your decision not to attack, not to counterattack in this case. Oftentimes, you choose not to retaliate when you can preserve some resources by not investing in that counterattack because you might have other options. And those options can lead to better strategic outcomes later in the future. So you kind of preserve an option for the future. We're doing a study, and later I will, when we talk about how this idea and paper developed over time, I'll show you. We did the basketball coaching study, where the basketball coaches, for example, will not put a player when they really need, because they want to preserve that player from fouling out later in the game. So it is really important that you keep options open sometimes, and you learn. Right. And finally, you don't want to counter with an action that is inconsistent with your strategy. So that's our final, because sometimes it can conflict your strategy, and the damage that you do in terms of developing this strategic positioning or reputation will be much bigger than the cost that by not responding. And other times, you might not respond to these small tactical actions because you want to take time to develop bigger, stronger strategic response later. Okay. And that can be more aligned with your overall strategy. Other times it's just inconsistent with your reputation. Like we also gave an example with Southwest Airlines when they didn't adopt this no-frill service. And their CEO just said, hey, this is inconsistent with what we do. We have other options to compete, not with this. So these are kind of the major reasons that we theorized that could lead to strategic forbearance or purposeful decision not to counterattack.
That makes sense. Well, thanks very much for that helpful clarification. So who would you say are the target audiences for this paper? Who should read it?
Yeah, so our primary target audience is obviously scholars in competitive dynamics area, where in competitive dynamics, the central framework is awareness, motivation, and capability. And briefly, you respond to a competitive attack when you're aware, when you're capable, and when you're motivated. But we knew very little about when you're motivated not to respond. So in this case, we are adding this part in competitive dynamics and in that framework and this is a first step. I just want to make sure we need additional empirical research to kind of expand and validate our points. But sure. But it's a good start, and it's an area that has been underdeveloped. Another audience is just the strategy scholars in general. In this paper, we talk about competitive attack as an event that you consider responding, but a threat to a company can be any event, really. And in strategy, we talk about organizational crisis and economic shocks and so on, and those are all threatening events that we might extend this, although until we start thinking about how to kind of respond to different types of events, we need to be more careful about the implications, whether this can really translate into that environment. But it can be a starting point to think about, hey, it's an economic shock and some companies did not respond, but that's not because they were unable, because they strategically chose that it was better for them not to kind of restructure and so on. And finally, I think a target audience should, and we hope it will be practitioners, managers. I think it's not normative model, but it can provide a guidance of which questions to ask when you're thinking about whether to counter an attack by a competitor. So I think if we have time later, we might get a little bit more into how this can help managers make wiser decisions.
Yes, definitely.
But those are the three target audiences that I believe can benefit. We hope can benefit.
Great. Well, since this is the origin series, we are interested in hearing about the origins of the project. With the subtitle of the series is "Where Does Theory Come From?" and we're all about trying to help demystify the theory development process. So, if you would just please tell us, how did this project get started in the first place, and where did you and Danny get the idea for it?
Yeah. To be honest, when I was preparing for this interview, I was kind of trying to reflect back to all the events that kind of led to this paper, and there was this book of it's called the author is Philosopher of Action, von Wright, and it was probably one of the earliest treatises of action. Like what was
the title of it?
The title is Norm and Action, I think.
Okay.
Von Wright, and it is a philosophy of action, really, and he tries to make a point there that forbearance, this purposeful refrain of not acting, is actually action. Mm-hmm. So obviously later, when I read more about in philosophy of action, there's a pretty solid argument that it is not really an action, but it's not passive inaction too. So it's somewhere between action and inaction, because it can have consequences. That when you purposefully not do something, and either you're expected or you have a duty to do to respond, then the consequences are almost similar with action. So that's the debate in kind of in the philosophy of action. And in strategy, this book was introduced to me by Tommi Nokelainen, who was also kind of interested in action and competitive dynamics. And then I started reading in that area. The second part is empirical. So once kind of I got this initial interest and this kind of absence of action, we did a study, and I mentioned earlier, I did interviews with basketball coaches. I was a professional basketball player until 2001, like back. I can't believe there are already 20 years since I played basketball. But players that were my teammates and that played in the same league with me became coaches. So that gave me access to them, basically. And I asked them whether we can tape some games, and then after the game, can we do interview? Like, you walk me through the game, and I'm just gonna stay, but I want you to consider both, like when you do something and when you wanted to do, but you not did.
Okay, so like asking the coach to narrate his thinking at each stage of the game.
Yes, during the entire game.
Wow, and that's great data.
Yes, and they were walking me through every decision that they were doing. And there, I saw first that 20% of all decisions were forbearances. Decisions when you consider action and you choose not to. And second, it gave me many insights about why they would do that, because they're kind of telling me their intent at that time, what they were thinking. So, for example, they would say, "Oh, I don't want to take a timeout. I want to keep it for later in the game," or I'm not substituting a player even though he's missing shots, because I don't want the team, because that was a playmaker, to start playing out of the concept they have. So it's kind of inconsistent with their strategy. And so you see a similarity with some of the propositions that we developed.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
So basically, to sum up, it came from some ideas from a discipline that was distant from us, philosophy of action, from philosophy, the field of philosophy, and then some empirical observations that actually this is a real phenomenon. I want to also add something else with this, and this is my personal kind of understanding of how all this went. When there is this book, and your strategy. So we all know the book of Art of War, like Sun Tzu.
Sure.
And that was not stimuli for me to look at forbearance, but I was aware of the book. And once you start reading now, after you have this idea, then you look for how this gets into.
Right. Well, I mean, a lot of that book is about how to win without fighting.
Yes, exactly. So in one sentence, they say probably one of the greatest skill of a strategist is understanding when to act and when not to act. And this when not to act has been understudied. We don't know as much as we know for acting. Kind of action had the dominance in our thinking. So all that became very interesting to look. Even sometimes I'm from Macedonia, and there is this writer that is my favorite. He has the similar surname with me, but we're not relatives. And in one of his poems, Goce Andrevski is his name. And in one of his poems, he was referring to his wife who passed away, early, and he would say, there is nothing more present and more visible than your absence.
Mm.
So there is this interesting phenomenon where you expect something to be around you, like you're kind of used to it, and when it's not, it's more visible than when it is. So the absence, the notion that something is not there but is so visible and strong, can be translated into business. Business is really something, you're expecting that your rival will respond because you're cutting prices and that can hurt their market share. And all of a sudden, no response. So it gets you thinking, oh, wait a minute, why there is no response?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a message? Is there some other reason? And understanding those reasons, why your rival will not respond, I think is very important for understanding strategy.
So your inspirations for this paper were philosophy, basketball, war, and poetry.
Yeah, thank you for summarizing. But the first two were really the original inspirations were the first two, the theory and the observation. But the other two came later once I started thinking about it. But yes, that made it very interesting to me. Let's put it that way. The last two, the war and poetry. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So how did you get started working with Danny on this?
Yes, well, with Danny, we got together at a conference, at the Competitive Dynamics conference that was organized at Queen's here on my university, and then I showed him also this other data with basketball coaches. So basically, we are working on both studies. Now we are working on that one too, and I show him like that, this phenomenon is real, and he really got interested in that. So we started from the beginning, writing and getting insights, and then again, and it was with him actually that we decided to first develop a theory paper, and then to go with kind of a qualitative study with basketball coaching and so on. So we've been working for both projects since almost the beginning.
Great. So there's more to come in this line of work with Danny.
Yes. It is under second review, so we have a good chance. So we'll see how it goes.
Oh, well.
With this other project. Yeah.
Best wishes for success with that other project then. That's wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah.
So tell us with this theory paper, from the point where you had the initial idea to the point where you submitted the manuscript to AMR, how did the project change and develop during that time?
Yeah. First, before I forget, I wanna really say thank you and to show how grateful we were to Joe Mahoney, the editor, and 3 reviewers that provided so many insights that probably everybody feels the same at AMR, but this is my first experience, and it was unbelievable. Like how people are so kind kind of thoughtful and also selfless, just to provide you these ideas to get better. When we started, the two biggest challenges that we encountered were first, clearly distinguishing forbearance. Because, when the nature of this construct is that it's absence. There's
Right.
The action is not there.
It's like in Sherlock Holmes, the dog that didn't bark.
Yes. So it was very important to find a way how to clearly, logically distinguish it from other concepts. And this was also interesting because, to me at least, because we were in a conference again, the AMR, and I got introduced to this paper published in 2016 by Dull, I don't know whether I pronounce the name correctly, but the paper is about necessary conditions analysis.
Mm-hmm.
And this framework provided us with logic that can really provide criteria for forbearance that are distinct from any other type of competitive response. Because if you don't have clear definition, then later on, anybody can challenge, it can become fuzzy.
Yeah.
So in this case, we identified, using that logical analysis, that awareness and capability are two conditions for forbearance and lack of motivation. And that is distinct from action, which requires all three conditions to be present.
Right.
Warrant response, or this public statement as a response, that requires only awareness. And involuntary response, or failure to respond, when you either lack awareness or lack capability. So in that context, it was very clear. And since then, our propositions became much clearer, and our theorizing was much clearer. The second challenging point that actually pushed us by the reviewers was that they were saying, okay, so you're showing this framework and these 5 drivers, but what is the theoretical underpinning of this? Like, you need to have a theoretical mechanism that will tie all the propositions. And there, I have to say that I'm going to be very honest with this. I have a colleague here from organizational behavior field, Bill Cooper. So I told him, what is it that can explain managers this urge to do something and then to choose to kind of be above that and to not do it? And he pointed me to self-regulation theory.
Right.
Where when you're addicted to alcohol or drug,
right?
And how come some people will stop, refrain from doing that, and others will continue doing it?
Right.
And that gave us that idea of a transcendence, where actually what they argue is that when you look beyond that immediate stimuli, when you look other parties, other time periods, more systemic issues, then we kind of transferred that notion and a little bit developed it to fit our model. So that was the second challenge that we successfully run, because that created a theoretical kind of explanation of our propositions. So these are just 2 major examples how when you're pushed by reviewers and you need to make that leap. You need to make a kind of bigger contribution, and that's, in this case, this is how it went with these 2 kind of insights that we got from colleagues.
That makes sense. That's great.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about, you acknowledged some gratitude to the editor and the reviewers. Tell us a little bit more about how the review process went in terms of how the manuscript changed during the review process.
Yeah. Well, the initial, they liked the initial idea. They saw a potential, and the gap was evident, because really most of the research was focusing on when there is inaction, it's kind of assumed that it's failure to act, and it's kind of in a negative sense, not positive. And we are emphasizing the positive aspects of not responding. So they like the idea, but at the beginning, we didn't have, as I said, a good theoretical grounding. The model that you showed earlier, we just had propositions. We didn't put together the transcendent modes with the other dimension, which is those types of drivers of forbearance. So all that framework was developed really through constant feedback with the reviewers. So it made it much clearer. Like when you showed it now, it helped me when I was talking about my paper to just go through those propositions. So it sorted out in our heads, and the writing was much easier then. And with writing,
a table or figure can help you figure out your own paper better. Think of how much easier it makes it for the reader, right?
Yes, and at least in this paper, that was the major part for myself. But because I also have Danny Miller on this paper, and his writing is so simple, so clear, that that part was kind of added benefit to our paper. His writing is unbelievable. There is no additional word that doesn't need to be there to stay in the paper. So I learned so much from that.
That is one thing I definitely appreciated in reading the paper. Yes, I agree.
I think for myself as a young scholar, that was probably the best, most valuable learning opportunity for myself. So just to see how this succinct writing can make the paper much better.
Great. Well, one last question, but it's really a 5-part question. So it's a question about what impact you hope the paper will have. And I'm thinking about really 5 potential impacts. What impact do you think the paper will have in terms of its influence on future theory, in terms of its influence on future empirical research, in terms of its influence on future practice, in terms of its influence on future pedagogy, and maybe in terms of its influence on future policy, if there is any. So those are the 5 I'm thinking of: theory, empirics, practice, pedagogy, policy.
Okay, I'll go in that order. With theory, I've already kind of suggested that I think our paper provides basis now with clear definition of the construct to do quantitative analysis. Because if capability can be measured, let's say 2 rivals are with similar capabilities, that they have capability to respond to a price cut. Also, when they share same market, and that attack is in that market, and that's important market for a focal firm, then also that they're aware. So there are ways how to measure these 2 conditions, and then what you need is just to see whether action appeared or not. So it makes it easy to measure. Now, once we have that, then we can measure the outcomes of forbearance. We can test our propositions. Maybe additional boundary conditions will appear, and so on. So there is a basis for quantitative examination of our theoretical framework. But also, I think it is very important to do qualitative research too. For continuing to develop this way of kind of seeing competitive response, which is, to what extent managers can predict the intent. First, whether we can recognize that forbearance happened, but also what was the intent behind it. And for that, you will need kind of what I was describing before to get into the heads of managers, like when they do that, why they do that. So we need to extend it to top managers, maybe observing their behavior, how often they forbear, How is that important for their strategies? Whether they shape their strategies through these kind of purposeful decisions to not do something. So it gives puts the attention of scholars and researchers to, I believe, in an area that needs more development. So I think the paper provides opportunities for both quantitative and qualitative research. About the empirical research I just talked about, the qualitative can provide building this theoretical framework. The empirical can provide more validity in a larger sample, whether how often this phenomenon occurs, what is the impact of it. For example, whether strategic behavior of a company is shaped by some combination of both. Like, and this notion of strategic timing, really, if you think about it, it consists of actions, but also inactions or decisions to not act, because,
or at least a delay, yes,
or delay, exactly, yeah. Other was a question about the practice, and I think I mentioned earlier that I believe managers can really use this as a guidance, to kind of guide their competitive analysis. So if I can share my screen now to show you one model that I use in my teaching, for example. So I will talk about both the practice and pedagogy. So maybe some people might find it interesting. Yeah. So this is that central framework in competitive dynamics: awareness, capability, and motivation. So managers, the first question is, are we aware of an attack, and what prevents us to become aware? If you say, yes, we know, we have well-defined threat, do we have capability to react to that, to match that attack, for example? And if your answer is no, then you'll fail and you need to do something about it. But if you have capability, that doesn't mean you should counterattack.
Right.
The next question is motivation. And then when you talk about motivation, now you need to consider all these transcendence considerations that are in our paper before you go to the decision to initiate action, which can have questions such as, what should be the magnitude, timing, domain, and type. But here it will be, hey, are there other parties that will be influenced by this counteraction? Will that bring other rivals into the fray? What will happen with our relationship, with our past interactions, and what are the future expected interactions with this rival? How that will impact our strategy? Will that be consistent or not, and so on. So this framework, I think, can be used, and this is the part that is kind of in a circle added by our study in a new set of questions about what managers should ask before counterattacking. And I believe these can also have some value for policy. Strategy is a concept that can be applied to every level. So if you think about international or relationships between nations, our study shows that you should not engage in impulsive responses, because it might be more beneficial sometimes to not retaliate, to not escalate a conflict. And it kind of turns the attention toward more tolerant relationships. Consider how your relationship with another country, for example, developed. I believe it can have some impact. I don't want to oversell our study.
Sure.
Because we require a lot of more work on kind of developing all those implications, because the current study cannot make those implications, and cannot generalize to every level. But I'm saying there is a potential that it can have impact on policy once we develop full understanding of all situations and conditions where forbearance is beneficial. And oftentimes, I don't know if it is if you have experienced it, but when you're asking managers like, hey, why are you acting like this? And usually the analysis is cost of these actions and benefits of this action, but not the benefits of not acting. And this set of questions and propositions in our paper direct that attention. Like, what might be the benefit of not acting? Okay, so let's consider them. And other benefits will arise too. I'm pretty sure once more and more people, more and more scholars will get interested into developing this concept further.
I like the figure, and in addition to all those points that you made, it makes me think about whether forbearance and counterattack are the only two options. I was also thinking about defensive moves that would not be a counterattack per se. So like you try to steal away some market share from me by lowering your price. Well, maybe I just implement a customer loyalty program. Or if I already have a customer loyalty program, I double the benefits of it or something like that in order to retain my customers.
Yes, that's definitely. And that could be one reason for not engaging directly, but kind of avoiding competing with you. And that's another area that has not been explored as much. And in addition to that, you just reminded me, it is also important that we understand the actions with deceiving intent. Like sometimes I want to kind of surprise you, and I want to do something that doesn't deserve response really, because it's kind of misleading actions, and we don't know much about misleading actions. Like when you know that was misleading and deserves to not be responded or not. But it's important area of research too, I think. And also here, what is missing is word response. Like like I can make forbearance visible because I will say it was forbearance. I will publicly state. And there is great paper, Gu and colleagues, in 2019, very recent paper on word responses only. So I think the combination of word response and forbearance should be looked more closely in the future. But it's an exciting area of research, I believe. I've heard from scholars earlier that competitive dynamics was kind of empirical approach, not kind of theoretical, not much kind of theory embedded, but I think it's developing. More and more people are interested in competitive dynamics, adding more small parts, like this small part, but it can add to kind of theoretical basis of it. And so I'm excited. I'm excited by doing research in this area. Yes, for sure.
I agree, and I think this paper is definitely a big step in the right direction. And so I encourage those who are interested in exploring competitive dynamics as a field of research to definitely pick up a copy of this paper and dig into it.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for promoting our research.
Of course, yes.
And
thanks very much for sitting for the interview today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for the invitation, for the opportunity, and a great job with this series. I think it's very informative. I looked your other interviews, and really it's kind of very easy way to understand the area that those people that published that paper also kind of explore and are interested in.
Right. I mean, like I said, the purpose is to try to demystify the theory development process and to inspire more authors to develop their own theoretical contributions, perhaps by thinking about them, in terms of an analogy to one of these existing papers, right? And think about how they can go through a similar process to what you or the other authors in the series have gone through. Absolutely.
Yeah, I was happy to share, and I'm happy to hear other experiences in developing, because you learn all the time, and that's very important.
Indeed.
And I would like also to extend gratitude and thanks from Danny Miller. He was unable to be with me, but he also congratulates you on this series, on this initiative.
Oh, well, thank you. And do tell him that I said hello as well.